Hello and welcome to podcast.init, the podcast about Python and the people who make it great. You can subscribe to our show on iTunes, Stitcher, or TuneIn Radio, or you can add our RSS feed to your podcatcher of choice. You can also follow us on Twitter or Google+, with links in the show notes. And please give us feedback. Leave a review on iTunes, send us a tweet, send us an email, or leave a message on Google+. And I'd like to thank everyone who has donated to the show. Your contributions help us make the show sustainable. For details on how to support the show, you can visit our site at pythonpodcast.com. We are recording today on September 22nd, 2015, and Chris Patty's actually not able to join us today, so your host today is Tobias Macy. Today we're interviewing the core developers of uWSGI, Adriano, Ricardo, and Roberto. Could you please introduce yourselves?
Hi, I am Adriano. I am a master degree student, and I am the developer of many uWSGI plugins.
So, hello, I'm Ricardo. I'm a consultant specialized in web development and free software.
Hi, I'm Roberto. I'm the lead developer of the uWSGI project. I mainly work in the hosting industry, and I'm a game developer.
And could you share with us how you each got introduced to Python?
I was introduced to it when I was looking for a development language that was suitable for someone who had never programmed before. I was still in high school, and so, I find it on the internet and I started learning it by myself.
I started playing with Python 10 years ago. I was looking for a scripting language. At the time, I was something like sysadmin, and was looking for something better than Bash for scripting.
I started looking at Python in 2003 because I was working in a Perl-based company where making jokes about Python was the main thing to do every day. So I started looking at it, but I started using it professionally about 2007.
And for anyone who hasn't come across the project before, can you explain what uWSGI is and what makes it unique?
Okay, for a lot of people, uWSGI can be seen as an application server, but internally we prefer to call it as a hosting infrastructure because it is something that try to cover all the poor people needs when deploying web applications. Especially for a system where you don't have enough freedom to install external packages and so on.
And how did you architect uWSGI in order to allow for supporting so many different languages?
Its main core is really, really tiny. I think being tiny is the only way to accomplish that result. So we made up extremely modular infrastructure. So adding a new language is not so difficult as the core gives you only a basis to simplify the job of interfacing with the uWSGI server from the C API of the language. Basically, all of the function to do low-level interactions, especially non-blocking programming or interfacing with the configuration system are extremely simplified when you start embedding a language in uWSGI.
And how does uWSGI compare to something like Passenger, which is something that started off in the Ruby world?
I think it shares a lot of, how could I say, we can say we have the same target. Passenger born as something to allow easy deployment of Rails app and help the developer, the programmer, to maintain that app healthy in the web server. uWSGI start with the same target, but eventually during the time evolved a lot in respect to Passenger.
Yeah, it definitely seems to have much larger feature set than what Passenger currently supports, though they have been adding a lot of other capabilities. And speaking of the feature set of uWSGI, it's pretty incredible how many different capabilities it supports. And does that make the code complicated to understand and modify, or does the plugin architecture that you mentioned make it easy to keep all those different capabilities segregated?
Absolutely, the modular development simplified a lot the plugin development. I think Adriano could answer.
Yeah, I was thinking to that too, because I approached the code base when I first started working with Roberto, and I had no previous knowledge of uWSGI. But after just about a few months, I was able to write a pretty complicated plugin. So you all you have to do is to look at the source code, look at their examples. There are a lot of plugins already existing, and you can just make an idea of how things work on the inside.
I think the only really hard part, if you want to develop a uWSGI plugin, is interfacing with the non-blocking system. As with a single code base, we need to support multi-threading, multi-processing, coroutines, green threads. So that's probably the only hard part to grasp.
So every one of the plugins needs to support asynchronous I/O in order to keep from locking up the rest of the system?
The objective of the uWSGI API is to abstract the plugin developer from that kind of things. You have a bunch of functions to read, to write, to open connections. If you use them, you are safe that your plugin will be async safe.
Can you describe some of your favorite features in uWSGI?
Riccardo, start.
Okay, so my preferred feature is, I think, the spooler, because, like it was saying Roberto before, it's one of these Pullman features that when you don't have like a lot of resources to manage external services, like in this case a queue, it's really helpful to have them integrated. So, you can start easily and add features, and you don't need to worry about a lot of working systems.
Yeah, when I first came across the spooler, I was pretty amazed at the fact that it would allow you to avoid having to set up a Celery infrastructure, at least when you're getting started, in order to be able to do background tasks.
Yeah.
My favorite one is the Emperor, mainly for its name, for its amazing personally, I need to deploy hundreds of different applications on dozens of servers, so something like that simplified my life a lot. It was one of the oldest features introduced in the project, effectively because it was one of the much needed for my own needs. So it's basically the one I like most.
And can I sidetrack the discussion for a second? It seems that the Emperor capability would be really useful in an environment that's taking advantage of microservices because of being able to mount multiple applications under a single overarching container. Is that am I correct in that assumption, or am I way off base?
Yeah. You only need to differentiate between mounting multiple applications in the same process. That, albeit supported, is a really bad practice. Mm-hmm. I discourage everyone to do this. But you can obviously have different bustles. Bustles are the single instances managed by a single Emperor, each one mapped to a microservice. Maybe all of them running in the same container or something like that.
And so the Emperor allows you to specify the routing between the different applications as well?
No, because this would violate the Unix paradigm. So okay. You have another component for doing routing between instances. That's the fast router.
Okay. That
you can obviously start via an Emperor. And the fast router basically is a non-blocking server, a non-blocking proxy that you can place behind Nginx, for example, and will start routing a request by rules you can define to the nodes. There is a variant of the fast router, that's the HTTP router, that do the same thing, but you can place it as the frontmost proxy. It supports HTTPS, speedy, and so on.
Yeah, having that capability baked into one tool set is pretty amazing, particularly given that uWSGI supports so many different languages, allowing you to have microservices written in each of those different languages, all being mounted together within the same overarching architecture so that the end user doesn't see any difference between the different services and they can just interact with the overall platform, I suppose. I believe there was one more of you to list your favorite feature.
Oh yeah, I think it was me.
Okay.
Actually, I like Spooler too, but Riccardo stole it from me, so I'm gonna change it. And the one other feature I really like is the subscription server. Basically, when you launch a service, in my experience, HTTP services, you can just have multiple servers that Roberto will help me if something is wrong. But basically, you can have multiple servers that are working together. And those servers can be added dynamically to the configuration. So if you need more, they can just announce themselves to the subscription server and they're gonna cooperate. So it really seems useful to me.
Yeah, mainly you have the opposite of the standard setup where you add nodes to the proxy, reconfigure it, restart it, and it start forwarding request. With subscription system, it's the opposite. The node subscribe to the proxy, and the proxy automatically forward the request to them.
So, what have you found to be the most overlooked or underutilized features of uWSGI?
I think internal routing is not so used. There are very few examples on Stack Overflow and so on. I think as a lot of the new features are based on it. For those who don't know it, internal routing is a kind of modern write, but on steroids, as it's is an almost Turing complete language embedded in your configuration, allowing you to define rules based on the single request. It even has a goto.
Yeah.
You can jump in your request chain. Another feature is the offloading, but thanks to a bunch of plugins that are recently released, this is gonna change. Basically, offloading allows you to avoid making one of your workers busy in simple tasks like serving static files or doing WebSocket transaction and so on. Offloading works by spawning an external thread with async capabilities. So a single thread can manage thousands of connections. For example, the most common scenario is spawning one of those offload threads to serve static files. So when the request for static files come to uWSGI, it delegates it to these offload threads. A single offload threads can truly manage thousands of requests.
Yeah, I've recently been taking advantage of that capability because where I work right now, we host our application in Heroku, and so being able to use uWSGI to host those static files directly has been very useful and simplified the overall stack so that I didn't have to, for instance, start using S3 for the static assets. And also the WebSocket capability, being able to offload that and host that within the same application container definitely seems really powerful, particularly for things like, for instance, running the Flower application for Celery for being able to monitor your background queues. So could you guys dive a little deeper into the load balancing capabilities of uWSGI?
Okay, this is an area where we are getting a lot of improvements thanks to IntelliSurvey. That's a Perl-based company that is sponsoring a lot of new features in the 2.1 branch. Load balancing, I think currently, especially in the fast router service, is a lot powerful, as differently from a lot of proxy servers, can be truly dynamic. So you can remove nodes, add nodes using the subscription system we have seen before, without the need to reconfigure the proxy. The subscription system is based on a series of UDP packets constantly sent by the nodes. So when the proxy stops receiving those packets, can know that the node is down even before routing a request to it. Currently, we are working on connection draining. It is already available in the IntelliSurvey branch. Basically, it allows to suspend a request in the fast-router process until some backend node is available. This has been developed mainly for allowing the fast router to contact the Emperor on demand to spawn instances only when the first request reach them. This is a pretty new feature.
And so in terms of performance, how does the load balancing in uWSGI, particularly given its ability to add and remove nodes dynamically, how does that compare to the load balancing for something like HA proxy or Nginx?
Well, both requires reconfiguration of the proxy. Mm-hmm. So I think from this point of view, there is much space for uWSGI to be a better choice. Regarding performance, the fast router part is on pair with uWSGI, albeit they speak a different, with Nginx, albeit they speak a different protocol. HA proxy is a little bit more performant because it uses some low-level techniques, especially on Linux system, that we do not use in uWSGI. And I don't know if we will ever use it. I mean, the use of the splice syscall in HA proxy.
So are there any cases where you're better off using uWSGI without a reverse proxy like Nginx or Apache?
Placing the application server alone on the internet is always a bad idea.
Okay.
Especially when you have a blocking app. For blocking, I mean a multi-threaded, multi-process app where a single request could block an entire process or thread. So having a proxy discarding bad request or long-running request is the safest way.
So the configuration syntax looks like it provides a very rich set of capabilities. Is it based on a general purpose programming language, or is it a DSL that you wrote specifically?
It's a DSL. We started implementing something with Lua, but I don't think there is much more interesting in doing it. As when you start making too much complex configuration, it's not a good idea. So the simple construct we have in the actual DSL is more than enough.
So you mentioned briefly that the fast router supports HTTP2 or the Speedy protocol, and for anybody who is trying to make their app work well with HTTP2, particularly in the Python space, what would be the best way for them to do that? I know that uWSGI as a protocol doesn't currently support it, but are there any ways that people can make their app compliant with that new specification?
Unfortunately, until we don't fix WSGI, there is not much space for HTTP2. Unfortunately, improving WSGI is a really complex topic. There have been already 4 attempts in updating it. Every time all goes wrong, people goes berserk and so on. It's really a problem without an easy solution. So I don't know how to answer these questions, because every time someone tries to improve WSGI, bad things happens.
Yeah, the benefits and the
best thing you can get from proposing to improve WSGI is some kind of insult.
The power and peril of having a well-adopted standard.
Yeah.
So what are some of the new capabilities that we can look forward to in the future of uWSGI?
I think the most awaited one that's already available in 2.1, the master on GitHub, is the integration with Docker. So an emperor can spawn a Docker container with a single line of configuration, even on demand. So you can spawn your emperor on a socket, and the first request on that socket, a new Docker container will be spawned. We have much improved offloading. So a bunch of new plugins are being developed for using it. I think mainly new features will come in the form of a plugin because we are trying to make the core even more teeny. So I have no idea of third-party developers what they're trying to do.
Yeah, maybe we'd like to do something regarding Internet of Things. So we'd like to adopt support those new protocols that are being developed on that side, and maybe uWSGI can be a very useful tool on that field too.
And so, given the dynamic load balancing in terms of being able to add and remove nodes, and what you just mentioned of the Emperor being able to spin up Docker containers, it seems that uWSGI is pretty well positioned to remain relevant and perhaps even grow in relevance given the trends that we've been seeing in modern infrastructure.
Yeah, absolutely. We have seen constantly adding of new layers in web deployments. So having something that can manage them, simplifying the process of spawning new daemons, managing them, giving tools to automatically scale and so on, it's a good thing.
Are there any situations where using uWSGI is the wrong choice?
Oh, well, I think if you start learning Python or mainly Python web framework, you can be scared by the not so good documentation of the uWSGI. Or better than not so good, I will say massive overbloated documentation that really could scare a newcomer. And then we will end with people blaming the deployment in the Python world and that PHP is better in that area. And these funny sentences.
Yeah, I can definitely attest to being intimidated by the massive set of different configuration options available when trying to set up some uWSGI instances.
I have to admit that from this point of view, it's not very Pythonic.
So it sounds like there's some room for somebody to come in and contribute to the documentation with a getting started guide of these are the minimal set of configuration flags that you need to worry about so that somebody can have a more gentle on-ramp to using the tool. So following that topic, what are some of the areas that you're looking for with help in the project that the community can contribute to?
Okay, so I think we can use help like in triaging bugs, because we usually have quite a few issues filed which are not exactly bugs but requests for help. Also, we have quite a bit of duplication in GitHub issues, actually. So any help regarding that is much appreciated. And then on top of that, we run often a covariety scan of uWSGI. And we have quite a few bugs still to fix. So if anyone is looking for like some quick hack over interesting code base and no C and you're not scared, it's very welcome to help us fixing covariety spotted issues. And I think also we can use help like in helping people with issues on the mailing list. So everything that helps fellow developers is welcome and needed.
So before we move to the picks, are there any questions that I didn't ask that you think I should have, or any topics that you want to talk about?
I don't think so.
No, it seems fine.
I'd like to ask maybe to you guys regarding, we talked before about HTTP2 and the uWSGI protocol. So I'd like to ask, do you think that Python is losing ground in the web space, like against the systems like Node or Go?
I think that the threat from Go in particular has more to do with the multi-core support than it does with the HTTP2 support, just because the HTTP2 standard is still so new that I don't think there are as many people who are focusing on that problem at the moment and trying to make their applications compliant with that specification. But if we don't do something in the near future about it, then I think it could end up growing to be a bigger problem. So I know while I was doing some research for the show, I was searching around about HTTP2 support in the uWSGI protocol, and I came across a couple of draft specifications trying to figure out how to upgrade uWSGI to support some of the newer web capabilities. And so I think that bringing focus to that in the larger community and how important that is to the future of Python, I think is really valuable. So I definitely encourage anybody who has the capability or interest to improving that specification and improving that capability. I think it's definitely a very good use of your time in terms of helping the Python community improve and stay relevant. So with that, we will move into the picks. And so for my first pick today, I'm going to choose the Contact application in KDE, which is their integrated suite for managing your calendar and email and notes. And it's just a really well put together application, has good integrations between all the different features within it, as well as with the larger KDE desktop. So I started off using the Gmail web applications, and then I tried out Thunderbird for a little while, and Thunderbird was just really laggy, and so I ended up trying Contact and have been enjoying it so far. For my next pick, I'm going to choose Manjaro Linux, which is the distribution that I've been using for the past couple of years. I was using Ubuntu and got tired of the 6-month upgrade cycle and always having my PPAs broken and not being able to use them anymore. So I wanted to move to a rolling release distribution, and Manjaro is just a really nicely put together distro. It has all the advantages of Arch Linux, but adds some polish to it to make the installation and startup a lot simpler for people who aren't as hardcore Linux users. And for my last pick, I'm going to choose the movie Black Hat with Chris Hemsworth that I watched recently. It's a good movie, has a good storyline, and they actually did a really good job of maintaining, of being factual in their representation of the use of technology within the movie. So they didn't have the typical hacker depiction of somebody just bashing away on a keyboard and doing magical things instantly. They were much more down to earth and realistic about how the technology was used in the storyline. So definitely recommend that for anybody who's interested. And with that, I will pass it to you, Ricardo.
So first I have a book recommendation. It's Building Microservices by Sam Newman, published by O'Reilly. It's like the title say, it's about microservices, of course, but it's not about implementing them. It's more about the architecture and all the issues that you'll find when starting deploying or thinking about deploying microservices architectures. And then, today I've kind of released Django plugin, Django application called Django Dennis, which you can find on my GitHub account. It's like a small application that helps recovering deleted data from a backup DB. So it's still in its infancy, but hopefully in the next few days it will be quite useful, I hope.
Adriano, what have you got?
Well, I've been thinking to this kind of things, but I really have a lot of things, but nothing like those you proposed. I'm gonna search it back.
You can share anything you want. There's no restrictions here.
Yeah, I want to share the story of Paxos. Paxos is a distributed system protocol that has a really curious story because its author that is well known in the distributed systems world, that is Leslie Lamport, Turing Award in, I think, 2014, didn't want it to be boring as all these algorithms and stuff that can just satiate the reader. And so he built upon it a whole story about this lost island in Greece, where someone found a very old story of those inhabitants, those native people that used a very strange protocol to live democratically. And this paper was so strange that at first it was denied, it wasn't published, and then after many years it has been published, and it's one of the most well-known paper in the distributed systems field. I'm gonna put the link.
Yeah, the Paxos algorithm is definitely very interesting, both for how well it functions in distributed systems and for, as you said, the backstory of how it was created and came to be known. Do you have any other picks?
No, thank you.
Okay. Roberto, how about you?
I would like to increase the level of the discussion, proposing you this TV series, The Brink, with Jack Black. I don't know if you know it.
Yep.
Really fun. I don't know if it's really fun because sometimes I think it's depicting something that is really happening. So I strongly suggest you to check it.
All right. So, as I said before, I really appreciate you all taking the time out of your day to join us and tell us all about uWSGI. For anybody who wants to learn more about the project or follow you guys and what you're up to, what would be the best way for them to do that?
For support, I think the mailing list is currently the best place to ask for help. Eventually, the IRC channel, sharp uWSGI on Freenode. And obviously, if you want to contribute, make a pull request on GitHub. Riccardo will try to reject it, but I can assure you I will check it.
And for anybody who wants to follow you individually, how can they do that? And Adriano, how could people find you online?
Yeah, I'm gonna put my GitHub account.
Okay. So for everyone listening, you are Aldur, ALDUR on GitHub.
Yeah, thank you.
And Roberto can be found at Unbit on Twitter. And Riccardo, how about you?
I have a GitHub account, which is XRMX, and the Twitter account is @rmistaken.
Okay.
So.
All right. Well, I hope you all enjoy the rest of your evening, and I really look forward to digging into some of the new features that you mentioned in uWSGI.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for asking.
Thank you. Have a great night.
Bye.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.
Have a nice day. Bye.